So next up, we have Ms. Ananya Chandra, the managing partner of InnoPact, an early stage investor in technology startups targeting women and other underserved customers in and other emerging markets. She also leads Women Prosperity Lab, a startup enabler backing the future of tech for women. Ms. Ananya previously co-headed Accelerating Growth of New India's Innovations, AGNII, the flagship innovation initiative of the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. Here, she collaborated with key national and international stakeholders to promote the commercialization and scale-up of innovative technologies across India. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ms. Ananya. Over to you for the session on SDG9, Commercializing Frugal Innovation, Frugal Lessons from India.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And thank you to the organizers and GCPIT. So today I'm talking about commercializing frugal innovation. And, you've obviously, given me, the introduction that I needed. But very quickly, InnoPact, as an early stage investor, we've invested in India, Latin America, and we look at emerging markets and look for high impact, innovative startups at the early stage. And prior to that, before InnoPact, I helped build and scale India's National Technology Commercialization Program, AGNI. And I think a lot of my learnings that I'll be sharing today and just how I'm looking at frugal innovation will be coming from there. And previously, I was a health tech entrepreneur. I built an app called Just Move, which was a primary care app, built it, scaled it, led it to exit towards the end of 2016. And much before that, started my career as a lawyer. So what we're talking about today is a topic that I think relates very directly to SDG9, both in terms of resilience as well as in terms of inclusion, and that is frugal innovation. And how do we, at AGNI, how did we think about what is frugal innovation and what are some lessons that can be learned from that? So we'll be covering basically three topics. One is, who do we consider as a frugal innovator? And then in the Indian context, what is often called as jugaad, and in equal measure looked down upon at as well as celebrated in certain circles. We're going to get to the nuts and bolts of, does jugaad have commercialization potential? And we're going to end with kind of the two lessons that I picked up from my time at AGNI in terms of how we can help frugal innovators succeed. So question, who is a frugal innovator? I'm going to be sharing three examples, and I want you to just consider whether you would consider them to be frugal innovations or not. So this is an innovator called Ishan. He recognized a problem in India, and that is that more than 40 million children from the ages of 6 to 14 years in India do not have basic infrastructure at schools, leading to deficiencies both in terms of health as well as performance. And so Ishan innovated and created a bag, a school bag called DeskKit, which has a lightweight, ergonomic table that can be used for children of different heights and different ages, and it can be easily carried out without causing backaches. So this is one example. The second innovator I want to present today is Sheikh Mastan Wali, who is a mechanic in southern India. And lo and behold, over his years, he taught himself, basically, he's a self-taught engineer, and he's created a cryogenic B100 engine that runs on multiple fuels and has higher fuel efficiency than many other cryogenic engines out there. And then third is a company I'm sure we're all familiar with, Siemens, which is often, so their Siemens fetal heart monitor is often touted as an example of frugal innovation in many parts of the world. So basically, Siemens set up a healthcare team in the last decade and realized that a lot of the healthcare technologies that they were trying to commercialize in India were simply not affordable, from hospitals in tier one cities to small little primary healthcare clinics in your peri-urban areas. And so they created a fetal health monitor that reduces the cost of an ultrasound by over 60%. And so is Siemens a frugal innovator? Is Mr. Wali a frugal innovator? What about Ishan? And I think that the way to look at frugal innovation and consider it is to look across 4 dimensions. And I think all of these dimensions have a strong element of frugality or resource efficiency and efficacy attached to them. So, in Ishan's case, the inventor of Deskit, his frugality comes from taking into account the market affordability constraints in terms of children and how much they can afford to spend on a backpack today, when they may be struggling to make ends meet at home. And in the same measure, Siemens looked at frugal innovation from the perspective of how do they gain a competitive advantage in the medical device space in India, because their technologies were simply too expensive for the market at that time. The third kind of frugal innovation is something that all entrepreneurs, including myself, are very familiar with, and that is lean or agile. Which is how do you test and learn to, rather than create a product in a waterfall manner, in which is that have everything and all product specifications up front. How do you test your assumptions, convert them into knowledge, and on the basis of that proceed? And the fourth kind of innovator is really where I think the real essence of Jugaad comes in, and that is the frugal innovator that innovates as a matter of necessity, whose innovation has come from trying to solve a problem in her or his life, and is often done in an environment of severe resource constraints. And a perfect example of this kind of a frugal innovator is Remya Jose, who at the age of 14 created a pedal power washing machine because her mother had fallen ill and she didn't want to take the family's clothes and walk 3 miles to go and wash the clothes in the closest river. So she basically took her bicycle and spare parts and put them together and created what is a pedal powered washing machine. So if you look closer at who the pedal powered washing machine wasn't an idea that came from, we need to solve a particular problem. It came from an absolute area of how do I have a problem right now. It's a burning problem. How do I solve it for myself? And we often find that, the aptitude of this innovator is very high when it comes to creativity. However, on the downside, there is often, they've created something for themselves. There's not a business plan attached to this, and there's often a lower level of technical know-how. And some of the things that we saw, so at Agni, when I was at Agni, the 3 most common problems that I saw with real Jugaad innovation is that they actually often got a lot of media attention, which, I think is a great thing when you feature these, frugal innovators in articles. But I think it sets the wrong expectations in mind, and it also doesn't provide sufficient amount of the actual support that these innovators need. And, often a lot of these innovators, as a result, don't get the direction that they need. They get a lot of coverage, which is fleeting. And as we've often seen, these ideas do often get copied. And so, just to sum up, as we can all imagine, a lot of these technologies or innovations are lacking the bells and whistles we expect from, a typical product innovation when we see one in the market. However, the upside is that they're actually, because they're sourcing materials that are locally available and using local talent, they can be highly inclusive and highly ecologically sustainable. So coming to question 2, does Jugaad have commercialization potential? Or is it, or are the Jugaads that we find in India just often slated to be what they are, which are great ideas that, stay that way? So, taking the example of the pedal-powered washing machine again, or any innovation, on the screen, you'll see the typical roadblocks that any product or any innovation encounters when they're trying to commercialize. So you can imagine you've got a prototype, you've created something, you need to then do a product design from a commercialization point of view. You need to raise funds for it, find the manufacturers and factories and suppliers, figure out your go-to-market plan, figure out your logistics and delivery plan, and get all these elements in order and get the product in the hands of the customers. And before that, you really can't say your product is commercialized. If you're a Jugaad innovator, there are problems at each and every stage. How do do you have enough expertise to design your prototype into a formal, from a design perspective, create something that can then be replicated and scaled? You may be lacking access to funding, which is arguable. The government today is very supportive of these innovations and has a lot of grants. But then the bigger problem that Jugaad innovators today face is figuring out how do you actually go about producing, because there's very little support today available across the world, and particularly in emerging markets like India, for figuring out what are the supply chains that are useful for product innovations. And then figuring out what your addressable market is and how you will scale are serious challenges as well. However, if we look at the idea itself, if we look at pedal-powered washing machines, Remia did not, if we think about what could have happened or how it could have been commercialized, there are actually similar products out there in the market globally that have been commercialized. Everything from Jira Dora, which is again targeting the low-income segment and is $40, to high-end Droomy, which is, they sell it as a portable washing machine and, price it at $350. So the commercialization potential for the idea does exist. And, so to answer the question, can Jugaad innovation be commercialized? We've seen this happen at Agni again and again. And I want to present, some of the examples that, you can see on the screen are, farmers who have created biomass gasifiers and are now exporting, internationally. A farmer who was used to climbing trees, to get coconuts and other farm produce, and then created and managed to commercialize what he calls the tree climber and get the right players, to get his units produced and sold. And then, a rickshaw puller who created a, multi-purpose food processor. So, we have seen in India examples of Jugaad innovators actually commercializing innovation. And so that, brings me to the last part of my presentation as to what are the key lessons that I learned from my time at Agni for how we can help frugal innovators. And I think these lessons are applicable to ecosystems across the world. This is just what we found particularly useful in India. We look at it as I look at it as two lessons. What's the mindset that we need to bring, and what's the tool set we need to bring. From the mindset perspective, I think the biggest problem that I saw in the ecosystem is that you've got, two kinds of people when they look at Jugaad innovation. You've got the cynic that, who says it's just too difficult. These are too technologically immature. How do you know if the entrepreneur even has the time to commercialize it if they're trying to make ends meet at home? And then you've got the you've got the full 100% optimistic, nothing, there's no rainy days cheerleaders, who I think can then set up expectations in the minds of any innovator that the path is going to be easy and get them featured in lots of magazines, so on and so forth. And I think that we have to as to support this ecosystem of frugal innovation. I think the right mindset that I found personally was to be the coach, and that was to help the innovator really identify and test out what assumptions are they making that they will need to prove are reasonable and they can convert into knowledge to create their products. So one of the biggest assumptions that I found that Jugaad innovators had not considered is how much time can they spare from their daily responsibilities to actually focus on commercializing. And alongside time, it's also resources, because every entrepreneurship venture does need to have a certain level of bootstrapping. And then from there you have your standard questions as to that diagram that I showed, how what would be your market size, what would be your design, how would you scale it, so on and so forth. And one important point here is that often these um, innovations have been created for a very local context. And so when they're thinking of expanding it, sometimes there's a lot of work that needs to go into, will this work? This works in village 1. This works in a village in Telangana. Will it work in a village in Bihar? And these are the customization needs that that they do need a lot of support on. But here was, I think, that where we as supporters of frugal innovation can really bring the tool set that's needed for more jugaad to be commercialized, and that is to build partnerships. It sounds perhaps cliched or an absolute no-brainer that of course you would need partnerships, but actually one thing we found is that partnerships are quite hard to execute. And there some people say that in the nonprofit sector often everyone is very territorial. Everyone's trying to protect their grants and their donors, and I think breaking through all of that and creating ecosystems and not ecosystems is key. And if the more partnerships that can be brought and make those partnerships actually alive, you can actually benefit not just one, not 10, but hundreds of frugal innovators, just through peer-to-peer learning and access to expertise when needed. And of course, Mr. Vinamra Mishra talked about the efforts that Ministry of MSME has made, and we've actually seen this. So Agni worked very closely with the Ministry of MSME, and we've seen how by bringing, they run their tech centers, and by bringing these partnerships in one physical location, they've managed to benefit clusters, huge clusters of small enterprises in one go. So the power of partnerships and ecosystems is there to see. It's the proof is in the pudding of the work that Ministry of MSME has done. And I think the last suggestion that I would make to commercialize frugal innovation is that seeing the successful examples of frugal innovations, there is a huge scope for creating a database of successful models. So you have a lot of this systematization of knowledge for business models that work for urban populations, that work for certain kinds of innovators that are perhaps following the lean and agile approach, which has its own set of resource constraints, but not the kinds that we're thinking about when someone is having to innovate out of necessity, out of like sheer willingness to live. And so, I think that there is a huge there's scope for someone to take leadership and undertake some thought leadership and build a database and bring these business models together. So on that note, thanks very much for having me. And yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ananya, for that interesting session on frugal innovation. Let's hope that frugal innovators have a better prospect with the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat in place. So, yes, and thank you so much for joining us today.